In a sleepy countryside that time appears to have forgotten, the days drift by with a gentle predictability. Mornings break with the golden light spilling over dew-drenched fields, where weathered tractors trundle along dusty paths and roosters hold court with their crowing declarations of dawn. Here, in this humble patch of earth, life moves at a pace measured by the turning of the seasons rather than the tick of a clock. It is a place where each crooked fence post and every weather-beaten barn seems to whisper stories of generations past, stories of resilience, of shared hardship, and of a deep, abiding love for the land. Not too far from this rustic haven, however, stands a stark monument to modernity, a sleek, upscale condominium complex proudly maintained by none other than the Homeowners Association (HOA). To the villagers, this complex is an alien structure, a pristine citadel of immaculate lawns, perfectly aligned hedges, and an air of superiority that could curdle fresh milk. The HOA, with their polished shoes and even more polished rules, view themselves as the custodians of order and elegance, completely oblivious to the unpretentious, sometimes downright messy ways of rural life. Enter our key players in this unfolding tale of revenge and mirth, briefly introduced yet destined to be etched into the annals of this countryside revolution. There is John, a no-nonsense farmer whose unassuming appearance belies a mind as sharp as the edge of a well-honed scythe. John loves his land and the simple rhythms of rural living, but when the HOA's bureaucratic meddling encroaches upon his cherished traditions, a spark of rebellious humor lights within him. Alongside him is Mike, his lifelong friend and the village's resident wisecracker, whose rapid-fire quips and devil-may-care attitude provide the perfect counterbalance to John's steely resolve. On the opposite side of the social spectrum stands Lisa, the self-appointed queen of the condominium complex. With her impeccably styled hair and an air of refined disdain, Lisa represents everything the villagers see as the epitome of urban snobbery. She runs the HOA with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove, convinced that her rules and regulations are the only path to a civilized existence. A loyal lieutenant named David accompanies her, ever dutiful yet increasingly caught in the absurdity of enforcing such oppressive edicts. The collision course between these two worlds is as inevitable as the change of seasons. The villagers, with their dirt-smudged overalls and sun-baked humor, see the condo complex as an eyesore, a sterile bubble intruding upon the authentic landscape of tradition and hard work. Meanwhile, Lisa and her cronies view the rustic ways of the countryside as chaotic, unrefined, and in desperate need of a makeover, preferably one that comes with an instruction manual and a hefty fine for noncompliance. In this peculiar setting, where the old world and the new are locked in a silent, simmering standoff, tension lingers in the air like the scent of freshly tilled soil. Every seemingly trivial incident, a misplaced tractor here, a burst of laughter there, carries with it the undercurrent of a brewing revolt. The annual barn dances and harvest festivals, celebrated with hearty laughter and rustic charm, are met with skeptical frowns and bureaucratic memos from the HOA which decry such unsanitary displays of rural merriment. As twilight casts its long shadows over the fields, the first hints of unrest begin to stir. John, ever the quiet observer, notices the creeping encroachment of the HOA's influence, the tightening grip of rules that threatens to strangle the very soul of the countryside. His heart, normally steady and patient, quickens at the thought of their absurd attempts to modernize his beloved home. With a wry smile and a glint of mischief in his eyes, John silently vows that the HOA's intrusion will not go unanswered. Their polished perfection, he muses, is nothing more than a fragile facade waiting to be dismantled with the right dose of humor and a touch of rural ingenuity. Mike, his faithful partner in jest, soon becomes the spark that fans John's quiet fury into full-blown rebellious enthusiasm. With every overly formal HOA notice and every snobbish remark about the improper way of living, Mike's tongue becomes sharper, his jests more pointed. His quips, delivered with the perfect mix of irreverence and subtlety, begin to circulate among the villagers like wildfire, each one a small act of defiance, each one a promise of the grander scheme that is slowly taking shape. Meanwhile, high above in the polished corridors of the condominium complex, Lisa remains blissfully unaware of the mounting storm. Caught up in her own world of rigid schedules, perfectly arranged flower beds, and endless meetings, she continues to enforce her vision of order with an almost religious fervor. David, ever at her side, dutifully patrols the community, his eyes occasionally catching glimpses of the rural landscape beyond, an unruly, free-spirited world that seems to mock the very notion of structure and regulation. It is in these quiet, unassuming moments that the seeds of rebellion are sown. A well-timed prank here, a cleverly repurposed piece of farming equipment there, and soon enough, the whispers of a grand plan begin to ripple through the village. The idea is simple yet revolutionary. If the HOA insists on tearing down the traditions and symbols that define the countryside, then the response must be equally bold, a satirical, orchestrated campaign of humorous retribution that exposes the absurdity of their rules. John and Mike, though only briefly mentioned in the tales of everyday life, now stand as the harbingers of change. Their resolve is shared by every villager who has grown tired of the condescending edicts handed down by the urban elite. The countryside is no longer content to quietly endure the onslaught of polished hypocrisy. Instead, it prepares to launch an all-out assault of laughter, creativity, and cheeky defiance, a full-blown, satirical revolution where every joke is a battle cry and every prank a declaration of independence. As the night deepens and the stars take their posts in the vast, ink-black sky, a quiet determination settles over the fields. The villagers, in their simple yet unyielding way, begin to imagine a future where the oppressive regime of the HOA is replaced by a new order, a world where tradition, authenticity, and humor reign supreme over sterile modernity. The stage is set, and though the players are only briefly sketched in the fabric of everyday life, the promise of their impending uprising is as vivid and unmistakable as the first light of dawn. Thus, in this humble countryside, beneath a canvas of twinkling stars and the silent watch of ancient trees, the groundwork is laid for a rebellion that will be as audacious as it is irreverent. The seeds of revolution, nurtured by a blend of quiet defiance and uproarious satire, are about to burst forth, transforming every inch of the land into a battleground where the spirit of the people will once again take root and flourish. It all began on an otherwise serene morning when the idyllic countryside was rudely interrupted by the mechanical roar of bulldozers and the incessant clamor of construction crews. In a scene that could only be described as both tragic and absurd, the Homeowners Association, HOA, had decided that the ancient, time-worn bridge, an emblem of rural charm and a vital artery connecting the cherished farmlands with the boundless fields, was no longer acceptable in their vision of a pristine urban landscape. The bridge, weathered by decades of history and lovingly maintained by the local community, was to be demolished in the name of aesthetic improvement and modern progress. John, who had spent countless afternoons sitting on that very bridge, savoring the gentle sway beneath him and the comforting creaks of timber, watched in disbelief as the first shovel of concrete was poured onto its worn surface. His eyes, usually so calm and calculating, burned with a mixture of sorrow and unbridled fury. "They've turned my sanctuary into a construction site," he bellowed, his voice echoing across the fields. Mike, ever the loyal sidekick and resident jester, stood by his friend with a grimace that soon morphed into a wry smile. "Well, at least now we know they're serious about beautifying the landscape," he quipped, his tone dripping with sarcasm as if mocking the very idea that the bridge could ever be considered an eyesore. The demolition was orchestrated with the meticulous precision of a military operation. Lisa, the self-proclaimed arbiter of taste and order, had overseen the entire process with a clipboard in hand and a look of absolute conviction etched on her face. Dressed in her impeccably tailored suit and high heels that clicked ominously on the concrete, she supervised the work as if she were conducting a symphony of destruction. "Out with the old, in with the new," she declared, her voice as cold and clinical as a bureaucrat's memo. David, standing dutifully at her side, nodded in agreement, though his eyes betrayed a hint of uncertainty, a silent acknowledgement that perhaps not everything in the countryside needed to be fixed. The bridge's demolition was not just a physical act. It was a symbolic blow aimed directly at the heart of the community. To John and the villagers, it represented the eradication of their heritage, the erasure of memories built over generations. As the final section of the bridge crumbled into a pile of rubble, a palpable wave of anger surged through the crowd. The local farmers, who had long endured the snobbish dictates of urban planners, began to murmur among themselves. Their collective outrage was a living, breathing entity that seemed to pulse in the very soil beneath their feet. John's mind raced with thoughts of revenge as he surveyed the destruction. The bridge was more than just wood and nails. It was a repository of stories, a silent witness to secret meetings, whispered promises, and the laughter of countless shared moments. Now, it was nothing more than debris. This was the final straw, a deliberate, calculated affront by the HOA, designed to crush the spirit of the countryside and enforce their rigid, sanitized vision of society. And so, in that moment of profound loss, John resolved that he would not allow this sacrilege to go unpunished. With a determination as steely as the very machines that had brought the bridge down, John began to formulate his plan of retribution. He gathered his closest confidants, including the ever-witty Mike, and convened a secret meeting in the dim light of an old barn. Over mugs of strong coffee and plates of home-baked bread, they plotted their course of action. Their strategy was simple. If the HOA wanted to tear down symbols of tradition, then they would tear down the empire of pomp and circumstance that the HOA had built. John's eyes gleamed with a mix of righteous anger and mischievous glee as he outlined his ideas. "We will build something they can't ignore," he declared, his voice resonating with both resolve and irony. "We will create a new bridge, a bridge not of wood, but of satire, wit, and undeniable rebellion. A bridge that not only reconnects our land, but also symbolizes the strength and unity of our community." Mike, never one to let an opportunity for humor pass, chimed in. "And while we're at it, we might as well install a toll booth. Only, instead of charging money, we'll make them pay with their precious sense of dignity." As the plan took shape, it became clear that this was not merely a response to the loss of an old structure, but a full-blown counteroffensive against a system that had long underestimated the power of a united, if eccentric, rural populace. The villagers began to rally behind John, their anger coalescing into a force that was as comical as it was formidable. They started to refer to themselves as the Bridge Builders, a name that was both an homage to what had been lost and a declaration of their intent to reclaim it in the most unexpected way possible. Meanwhile, back at the HOA headquarters, Lisa and David were blissfully unaware of the storm that was gathering momentum. The pristine corridors of the condo complex were filled with the sound of polished footsteps and the incessant hum of air conditioning, as if trying desperately to drown out the distant, yet growing rumble of discontent. Lisa, in her typical fashion, continued to monitor the progress of her projects, confident that her latest initiative was the pinnacle of modern urban planning. David, on the other hand, felt a creeping unease. Every time he passed by a window, he could almost see the smudged outlines of a new, rebellious structure taking shape on the horizon. But he quickly dismissed it as mere paranoia, a trick of the light, perhaps, or the exaggerated imagination of a man who spent too much time among eccentric farmers. As the day wore on and the demolition site was cleared, the tension in the countryside became almost tangible. The once quiet landscape was now a theater of whispered conspiracies and fervent determination. Children, who had once played carelessly along the bridge's sturdy rails, now looked on with wide, bewildered eyes as their parents exchanged knowing glances and nods of silent resolve. It was as if the very earth was conspiring to reclaim its dignity, rallying behind those who had been wronged. John's plan, born out of a blend of calculated strategy and raw emotion, was set into motion. The bridge had been torn down, but it had inadvertently laid the foundation for something far greater, a rebellion fueled by the absurdity of modern bureaucracy and the timeless, unyielding spirit of the people. The stage was now set for a showdown that promised to be as hilarious as it was revolutionary. In the following days, as rumors of the impending reconstruction spread like wildfire, the HOA began to notice unusual occurrences. There were reports of inexplicable constructions appearing overnight, structures that defied both logic and the sanitized regulations of urban design. Some claimed that these new bridges were built from recycled farm equipment and scraps of old barn wood, adorned with humorous graffiti and cheeky slogans that mocked the very existence of the HOA. The farmers, it seemed, had taken to their new form of protest with a passion that was both creative and unrestrained. For John, this was the perfect moment to turn personal tragedy into collective triumph. In the days following the demolition of the cherished bridge, a new energy surged through the countryside, a heady mix of indignation, creative mischief, and a determination to remind the elitist HOA that the spirit of the people could never be tamed. John, our steadfast farmer with a mind as fertile as his fields, convened a clandestine meeting in the old barn that had witnessed countless harvests and secret plots. Under the flickering light of a single, sagging bulb, he gathered the most trusted farmers and artisans of the village, setting in motion a plan that would transform their sorrow into a blazing campaign of satirical revenge. "Friends," John began, his voice low and resolute, Today, we rise not just to rebuild what was lost, but to strike back at the empire of pomp and bureaucratic arrogance that dares to erase our heritage. We shall create a rebellion, a masterpiece of resistance that uses our very own tools against them. His words, charged with both passion and mischief, stirred the assembled crowd. At his side, Mike, the village's quick-witted strategist, couldn't help but interject with a grin. And let's make sure our toll booth collects only their pride and pretentiousness as payment. The plan was as audacious as it was ingenious. The countryside, with its sprawling fields and resourceful inhabitants, would be transformed into a fortress of satire. Their first order of business, repurposing everyday farming equipment into instruments of defiance. Old tractors would be retrofitted with makeshift armor, and plows would be modified into contraptions that resembled medieval battering rams, only far more ridiculous in appearance. Let them tremble at the sight of our armored combine, John declared, his eyes glinting with mirth. We'll show them that the real power lies in the heart of the land, not in their sterile boardrooms. Mike, ever the creative mind, took charge of the propaganda effort. He organized teams of pranksters to produce satirical posters and cheeky banners that adorned the rebuilt structures throughout the village. One particularly popular slogan read, HOA, Homeowners of Arrogance. These pieces of art, splashed in bold, unrefined strokes of rebellion, quickly became the talk of the countryside. Even the local children, who had once played innocently near the ruins of the old bridge, now added their own playful graffiti to the mix. A spray-painted image of a tractor wearing a crown, mocking the self-appointed monarchs of the condo complex. Meanwhile, the centerpiece of their grand scheme was the construction of a shadow bridge, an illicit, makeshift structure built overnight under the cover of darkness. Unlike the old wooden bridge, this new passage would be constructed entirely out of reclaimed materials. Rusted metal, old planks, and even the discarded parts of broken farm equipment. More than a mere connection between two banks, it was designed to serve as a powerful symbol of the villagers' ingenuity and defiance. Its arches were deliberately exaggerated, almost cartoonish, a humorous jab at the rigid, antiseptic designs favored by the HOA. With every nail hammered and every plank set in place, the bridge grew not only in size but in the collective spirit of the people, a physical manifestation of their shared determination to upend the status quo. As the construction of the shadow bridge progressed, the village buzzed with excitement and sly amusement. Under the leadership of John and the ever-scheming Mike, groups of farmers would stealthily work in shifts, all the while exchanging quips and inside jokes about the latest antics of Lisa and her minion, David. I heard Lisa is drafting a new set of guidelines on the proper curvature of a hedge, Mike joked one evening as he and a group of conspirators huddled near the half-built bridge. Laughter echoed in the cool night air, blending with the sound of hammers and the occasional clank of machinery, creating a symphony of resistance that was as heartwarming as it was hilariously subversive. Back at the plush headquarters of the HOA, a different scene was unfolding. Lisa, meticulously reviewing her spreadsheets and design blueprints, remained blissfully unaware of the growing rebellion. Clad in her signature tailored suit and armed with a clipboard, she was convinced that order was soon to be restored, that her regime of stringent rules and impeccable aesthetics would prevail. David, standing at her side, kept a cautious eye on the horizon. His role as the enforcer had begun to weigh on him. Each day, he found himself growing more skeptical of the very authority he was meant to uphold. But his doubts were quickly buried beneath layers of protocol and the belief that the village was simply a collection of unruly individuals who would eventually fall in line. For every measure the HOA took, the villagers responded in kind. The rebels launched a series of audacious, well-timed attacks designed to throw the corporate titans into a state of disarray. On one memorable morning, a convoy of tricked-out tractors resembling a makeshift armored parade rumbled down the main road leading to the condo complex. Their engines bellowed in unison, a cacophonous reminder that the spirit of the countryside could not be so easily silenced. As the tractors approached, the security cameras at the complex captured images that would later be circulated widely on social media, images that, despite their original intent, turned into memes of epic proportions mocking the seriousness of the HOA. At another juncture, Mike orchestrated a daring stunt that would go down in local legend. He managed to borrow a combine harvester, temporarily converting it into a mobile art installation. Painted in wild, psychedelic colors and adorned with satirical messages like "agriculture is art, bureaucracy is boring," the mobile combine was driven right to the heart of the condo complex during a particularly somber HOA meeting. The sight of this ridiculous spectacle caused a ripple of laughter to break out among some of the less rigid residents, while the more dignified members of the HOA fumbled for explanations. "It appears that someone has mistaken our premises for a canvas," Lisa huffed, trying in vain to regain control of the situation. The incident was swiftly dubbed the Great Combine Caper by the villagers, and its legacy only served to further embolden the rebels. Yet, the most memorable moments of this grand revenge were the verbal duels that emerged between John and Lisa. Each time Lisa attempted to impose a new regulation or made an announcement with an air of condescension, John was quick to counter with a remark that was as biting as it was clever. During one particularly charged exchange, Lisa proclaimed in a broadcast meant for all residents, "Our community must adhere to the highest standards of order and propriety." Without missing a beat, John retorted from a hidden megaphone, "And our community must adhere to the highest standards of common sense, something your manuals seem to have forgotten." The ensuing laughter that erupted from the gathered crowd was a victory in itself, a reminder that wit and humor could dismantle even the most formidable walls of arrogance. As the Shadow Bridge neared completion, it stood as a towering symbol of the villagers' ingenuity and resistance, a tangible embodiment of their refusal to bow down to modern tyranny. Each rivet, each plank was infused with the collective spirit of a community that had been pushed to the brink, only to rise with even greater fervor. The bridge not only reconnected the divided lands but also served as a constant reminder to the HOA that the people's will was unyielding and that every act of suppression would only be met with a resounding, irreverent comeback. Thus, as the sun set over the rebellious countryside, John, Mike, and the rest of the insurgents stood proudly on their newly constructed shadow bridge, their eyes alight with the thrill of impending retribution. They knew that their efforts were just the beginning, a prelude to a larger movement that would soon dismantle the empire of outdated bureaucracy and pretentious elitism piece by piece. With laughter as their battle cry and ingenuity as their weapon, they marched forward, ready to continue the fight with the kind of satirical bravado that would be recounted in tales for generations to come. The day began with an eerie calm over the condo complex, as if the polished corridors and manicured lawns sensed the impending storm. Lisa, our erstwhile queen of conformity, stood in the lobby meticulously rearranging floral arrangements for the umpteenth time. Her clipboard clutched in one hand, she scanned the horizon with an expression of feigned composure. But behind that poised facade, a creeping unease had taken root. Rumors of strange happenings had reached her ears, a cascade of outlandish pranks and inexplicable structures popping up overnight. Meanwhile, David, her loyal subordinate, shuffled nervously as he made his rounds, silently questioning whether enforcing nonsensical regulations was truly worth the headache. Far away in the heart of the countryside, John and Mike prepared for their final act of theatrical defiance. The Shadow Bridge, an irreverent monument to the rebels' creative spirit, stood proudly as a symbol of their unyielding resolve. But they weren't content with simply showing off their handiwork. No, they had planned an elaborate series of stunts that would shake the very foundations of the HOA's rigid empire. The first act of rebellion came swiftly. In the early morning light, a procession of tricked-out tractors and modified harvesters rolled toward the condo complex. These weren't just any vehicles, each machine was decked out with vibrant, tongue-in-cheek decorations. One tractor sported a giant foam crown labeled King of the Fields, while another was emblazoned with the slogan, "Agriculture, Nature's Rebellion Against Bureaucracy." The convoy's engines roared like a raucous symphony of freedom, and as they reached the perimeter of the complex, the security cameras caught every glorious moment. Laughter erupted among the farmers, a cacophonous tribute to the absurdity of modern power structures, and the images soon found their way onto social media, morphing into viral memes that left the urban elite red-faced and scrambling for answers. Inside the HOA headquarters, panic began to set in. Lisa convened an emergency meeting, her tone frantic and tinged with disbelief. How could this be happening? We have rules, protocols, and, oh, for heaven's sake, sanitary conditions, she exclaimed, flipping through her impeccably organized binder of regulations. David, ever the reluctant enforcer, could only offer a meek, "Perhaps we underestimated the creativity of the countryside?" His words, though half-whispered, resonated with an unsettling truth. The more the HOA tried to tighten its grip, the more the villagers rebelled with joyous absurdity. John, standing atop the shadow bridge that now glittered in the sunlight with cheeky graffiti and cleverly painted slogans, addressed his assembled comrades. "Today we take back not just our bridge, but our dignity. he declared, his voice resonant with both triumph and humor. "Let our laughter be the hammer that shatters their ivory tower of tyranny." The crowd roared its approval, a chorus of voices united in their shared defiance. Mike, always the spark of comic relief, added, "And if they try to silence us, well, at least they'll have to listen to our tunes." With that, he signaled to a makeshift band of rebellious locals who had cobbled together instruments from old farm equipment ready to serenade the condo complex with anthems of irreverence. As the day unfolded, a series of satirical skirmishes ensued. The farmers, in a masterclass of guerrilla humor, installed oversized banners and inflatable mascots around the complex. One banner boldly proclaimed, "HOA, Homeowners of Absurdity," while an inflatable cow dressed in a superhero cape and holding a protest sign became the unwitting symbol of the countryside's uprising. Every corner of the urban stronghold was transformed into a canvas for the rebels' satire, each act a deliberate poke at the pomp and circumstance that had long oppressed them. Meanwhile, the digital realm was not idle. Mike had organized an online campaign where villagers shared videos of their hijinks, each clip more hilarious than the last. The videos featured everything from rogue tractors performing ballet moves to a meticulously choreographed flash mob of farmers dancing in overalls in the lobby of the condo complex. The campaign was a hit, comments flooded in, and even some urbanites couldn't help but chuckle at the ingenuity on display. The viral nature of the event only deepened the humiliation for the HOA, whose once sterile reputation was now being marred by the unstoppable force of rural creativity. As dusk settled over the countryside, the ultimate confrontation came to a head. Lisa, now visibly rattled and forced to confront the reality that her meticulously constructed empire was crumbling, made one last desperate attempt to regain control. She arranged a public address on the complex's central terrace, determined to deliver a speech that would quell the rising tide of rebellion. Standing before a hastily assembled podium, she cleared her throat, her eyes scanning the crowd, an odd mix of perplexed condo residents and gleeful onlookers from the countryside who had gathered to witness history in the making. "Dear residents," she began in a tone that wavered between authority and anxiety, "we must stand together in maintaining the order and beauty of our community. Our standards are not merely rules. They are the very fabric of civilized living." Her voice, however, was met with a chorus of stifled laughter and mocking applause from those who recognized the irony of her words. David, standing by her side, shifted uncomfortably as his colleagues in the HOA exchanged wary glances. The speech, meant to inspire compliance, instead became a farcical performance, a soliloquy of a regime that had lost its grip on reality. John, seizing the moment, stepped forward onto a nearby makeshift stage, an old wooden crate painted with the words, "Freedom or Bust." With a twinkle in his eye and a mic in hand, he addressed both sides with a blend of gravitas and wit. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate not the collapse of an empire, but the birth of a new era, a time when humor, creativity, and unity triumph over outdated rules and sterile perfection. We have built our bridge not only to reconnect our lands, but to bridge the gap between arrogance and authenticity." His words, delivered with a charismatic mix of sincerity and jest, drew thunderous applause from the crowd. Even some of the condo residents, long silenced by fear of reprimand, found themselves smiling at the undeniable truth of his message. In that electrifying moment, the HOA's empire truly began to crumble. The relentless barrage of satirical pranks, the uproarious public demonstrations, and the unstoppable spread of digital mockery left the regime reeling. The once unassailable fortress of bureaucratic pride was now nothing more than a monument to the folly of trying to impose order on a living, breathing community. Lisa and David, defeated not by violence but by the sheer power of collective laughter and ingenious rebellion, could do little but watch as the farmers reclaimed their heritage with every satirical act. As the final rays of sunlight faded, the countryside erupted in a spontaneous celebration. The rebels and their supporters gathered on the Shadow Bridge for a grand bonfire, a symbolic gesture that burned away the remnants of the old order. The flames danced high, casting playful shadows that mimicked the antics of the day's triumphs. Laughter mingled with the crackling of the fire, each spark a reminder that no institution, no matter how imposing, could withstand the vibrant spirit of a people united by humor and the desire for justice. Before the night drew to a close, John, with a look of contented mischief, stepped forward to address the assembled crowd one last time. "We have proven tonight that every brick of oppression can be toppled by a well-timed joke, and every decree can be unraveled by a simple act of defiance. To all those who have joined us in this glorious uprising, thank you, and to those still bound by the chains of conformity, remember, laughter is the most powerful tool of all. In the spirit of sharing this monumental victory and ensuring that the fire of rebellion never dies, we invite you to join our growing community of freedom fighters. If you enjoyed this tale of outrageous retribution, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to stay updated on our latest adventures in the battle against bureaucracy and the celebration of the human spirit. So, as the embers of tonight's triumph glow softly against the dark sky, let this be a reminder to us all. No empire, no matter how grand, can withstand the relentless force of humor, unity, and the undying will of those who cherish their heritage. The revolution is not over, it's only just begun.